We often ask why we haven't found aliens yet, but maybe the real question is, why is humanity so weird? From our obsession with fire, to our willingness to strap ourselves to controlled explosions, we might just be the galaxy's most successful accidents. Today we explore human oddity as a solution to the Fermi paradox. Evolution has produced millions of creatures smart enough to run away from fire. So far, it's produced exactly one species of dedicated pyromaniacs who decide to take it with them everywhere they go, and then asked how to make it hotter. We often treat intelligence as the universe's crowning achievement, something that will pop up anywhere life has enough time. What if intelligence isn't the rare part? Well, the rare part is us. Not better, just stranger. A particular mix of curiosity and fear, cooperation and conflict, imagination and appetite for risk, stacked in just the right order to turn a clever animal into a technological species. Because when we ask, where is everybody, we're also asking, why aren't there more like us? And if the answer is buried in our biology or psychology, then the great filter might not be these star-killing superweapons or freak catastrophes. It might be the long ladder of unlikely steps that produced Homo sapiens, or even the particular modern flavor of us that learned to compound knowledge into rockets. So today we're going to tour the human oddity catalog: language, cumulative culture, fire, long childhoods, coalition building, rule making, and that peculiar habit of imagining tomorrow, especially tomorrow's disasters, before they happen. Most of these traits probably are not filters by themselves, but a few might be, and even if each one is only a small hurdle, the real danger is that they stack, a chain of bottlenecks that rarely line up in the right order. Civilization might not be a single leap. It might be 60 little steps, and miss just one of them, you spend 10 million years a brilliant animal with no rockets. Needless to say, if even one link of the chain is uncommon, it could help to explain why the night sky seems so quiet. So hit those like, subscribe, and notification buttons, and let's dive in. The filters before humanity. When we talk about the great filters of the Fermi paradox, we usually imagine them as hurdles placed along the long road of chemistry to cosmos-spanning civilizations. And our 3-hour-long Fermi paradox compendium of terms and solutions, we divide them broadly into early, mid, and late filters. Each has plenty of room for subcategories too. Early filters are the ancient gates: habitable planet, abiogenesis, eukaryotes, multicellularity, things so ancient that Earth barely remembers them. Late filters are the ones still staring us in the face, managing our technology, avoiding self-inflicted catastrophe, and someday mastering interplanetary or interstellar travel and survival. But the oddities we're discussing today don't belong to either end of that journey. They sit squarely in the middle, among the ones we already call the mid-filters, the ones that separate clever animals from species capable of building civilizations. Because our world is not short on intelligence. Dolphins, crows, chimps, elephants, octopuses, raccoons. Earth is practically overrun with bright minds. Many solve puzzles, teach skills, use tools, mourn their dead, and cultivate rich inner lives. Yet only one species, so far, seems poised to step out the planet and out into the wider universe. Now we should note that real intelligence is still fairly young on Earth and does seem to be expanding overall. So the reasoning often goes that inevitably brains will improve until some critter gets smart enough for technology and that snowballs into space travel. But many biologists are skeptical about that, and more to the point, even if true, it would be nice to know what the key difference between us and other smart critters is. So the question becomes, what happened between bright animal and tool-wielding technologists? What were the quirks of body, mind, and behavior that nudged humanity across that invisible threshold? These are the mid-filters. They come after intelligence has evolved, but before civilization becomes inevitable, and the crucial traits that transform curiosity into culture, tools into technology, and long-term memory into long-term planning. They are the traits that allow intelligence not just to exist, but to compound, to build upon itself across generations, until something wholly new emerges, a civilization complete with cities, science, and the first fumbling steps towards spaceflight. And this is where human uniqueness may matter most, because it may be that the galaxy is not short on bright creatures, but short on creatures that make the peculiar leap from cleverness to cumulative culture, from problem solving to problem preparation, from reacting to the world to reshaping it. If even a few of those transitional oddities are rare, be they biological quirks or behavioral anomalies, then humanity's path to technology may represent a narrow and winding trail that few species ever find. And if thriving civilizations require something at least a little like us to exist first, then that rarity might be whispering to us across the night sky. These transitional and threshold mid-filters, the ones between bright animal and technologist, are what we are exploring today. Filter severity and compounding probability. Over the years, a lot of possible human unique or human rare traits have been suggested, some better than others, and some make better filters. We'll get to the big long list in a moment, but on this show we divide filters into lesser filters, minor filters, major filters, and great filters. A lesser filter is when we expect most worlds to pass. For example, most stars live as long or longer than our Sun, so a system where stars die before life has 4 to 5 billion years to evolve would be a lesser filter, possible but uncommon enough that most systems avoid it. And that would be an example of an early filter and a lesser filter. Minor filters are those where most worlds fail but may still succeed. We usually think of these as having a success rate below 50% but above 1%. A planet sitting in a star's habitable zone and having enough mass to hold on to liquid water would fall into this category, so it would be a lesser as well as early filter. Major filters are where success becomes rare, perhaps less than 1%, maybe only 1 in a few million, but not extraordinary. Something like a rocky body large enough to maintain an atmosphere qualifies. Our own solar system has millions of minor planets, yet only a handful approach that threshold. Across a galaxy filled with trillions of planets, even a single major filter still produces millions of surviving cases. Because of that abundance, we focus most of our Fermi paradox discussion on either great filters, those events so improbable they resemble winning a cosmic lottery, or on compounding filters, where several modest obstacles line up in a row, turning individual passable challenges into a collectively formidable gauntlet. As we move in these transitional filters, the late middle ones, it's important to remember that even traits which seem easy to pass can become formidable when they stack together. A lesser filter that slows evolution by 1 million years, or one that only 75% of species overcome, doesn't sound like much on its own. When you add enough of them in sequence, the cumulative effect becomes overwhelming. For example, I'm about to list roughly 60 such transitional filters. If each one had a 75% passage rate, which is very generous, the odds of passing all 60 would be about 1 in 30 million. And many of these are probably far harsher than 1 in 4 failure rate. If they were all as rough as that, with only 25% of species getting through each step, then the combined odds drop to 1 in a trillion. In other words, even if every star in the universe had a habitable world, and even if 1 million candidate species arose on each world before its star died, the expectation value would still be less than 1 species surviving all those transitions. Statistically speaking, nobody makes it. This is the weakness built into the Drake equation that many of us feel makes the Fermi paradox seem paradoxical when it presumably is not. Its first few variables are fairly reasonable, based on decent astrophysical probabilities, but the later terms, how often intelligence arises, how often it becomes technological, and how long civilizations last, are total unknowns. And because the classic Drake equation lumps each of these vast categories into a single term, we tend to give them all comparable probabilities. In reality, the picture changes dramatically if there are dozens or even hundreds of substeps hidden in those final factors. When you unpack them, the odds plummet far faster than these simple equations suggest. And with that said, let's jump in. The Human Oddity Catalog. If these transitional mid-filters sit between clever animals and technological civilizations, then the next step is to lay them out, every strange, specific quirk humans possess that might be necessary for a species to push beyond its atmosphere. Maybe no single trait makes us unique, but taken together they form a pattern that may be unusual, perhaps even rare, among intelligent life in the cosmos. What follows is a whirlwind tour of humanity's supposed oddities, each one a potential stepping stone, or stumbling block, on the road to civilization. This list is almost certainly incomplete. Indeed, I know it is since I deleted some of the candidates I thought were rather absurd, and some entries are far stronger candidates than others. Even a good candidate might only qualify as a lesser filter, while a seemingly minor trait could become a major barrier when paired with others. We'll discuss several of these in more depth later on, but for now, let them roll past you as possibilities. Traits to ponder as we consider what it really takes for a species to rise from clever animal to civilization builder. Cognitive oddities. We'll start with the mind, where several traits stand out. Humans don't just vocalize, we build recursive language with syntax. That's a strong candidate filter because it lets us transmit complex plans, teach abstractions, and coordinate projects that would be impossible if all we had were calls and gestures. We also model each other's minds with unusual nuance. Theory of mind pushed far past baseline. Not just what does he know, but what does he think I know, what does he want me to believe, and how might he be trying to mislead me? A species that can't play that game probably can't play politics, contracts, or large-scale cooperation either. Then there's time. We simulate tomorrow in vivid detail. We don't only learn by trial and error, we rehearse failure in advance. We imagine what could go wrong before it goes wrong, and that's basically the mental root of engineering and safety culture. Not to mention a lot of anxiety. Closely tied to that is counterfactual reasoning, the ability to run what-if worlds in your head. What if we try this shape instead? What if the load shifts? What if the wind changes? Experiments are just counterfactuals made physical and repeated. We lean heavily on analogy and metaphor, which may or may not be universal, but it's an efficient way to compress knowledge and transfer it across domains. Human language is incredibly high compression rate too, and often rather imprecise as a result. All language is effectively as fast as we can tolerate the errors in. We engage in mathematical abstraction, not just counting, but treating the world as manipulable symbols, and that may be less inevitable than we assume. See our alien math episode. We have combinatorial creativity, remixing old ideas into new ones, and we reward curiosity not only as a survival tool, but as its own kind of pleasure. And we have unusually plastic intelligence. The upside is that you can take a human infant and drop them into almost any culture, and they'll grow into a functional adult inside it. The downside is that we're born half-finished, weak instincts, long development, and a long period where we're basically a liability to the tribe. Finally, we can model large societies and systems, economics, institutions, logistics, chains of cause and effect. Most animals never need that. A species that can't think in systems may never build systems. Emotional and behavioral oddities. Then there's our emotional wiring, which is no less peculiar. A lot of civilization-grade behavior doesn't begin in the cortex, it begins in the gut. It's what your reward system praises, what your fear system punishes, and what your social emotions make feel right or wrong. If an alien biologist were studying us, they might not list intelligence as our primary trait. They might list insanity, or perhaps storytelling to be more polite. We are a species that feels deep empathy for fictional characters. We spend vast resources building monuments to unseen gods, reverently bury our dead, and pledging loyalty to abstract concepts. And these days, we even strap ourselves to controlled explosions to see what's on the other side of the sky. To a more rational species, we might look less like masters of our planet and more like its most successful accidents. Humans blend aggression and deep cooperation in a way that may be rare and essential. Wolves cooperate, chimpanzees fight wars, dolphins form alliances. We do all of that, and then we redirect it toward non-kin strangers bound together by symbols, stories, and rules. We are tribal, and yet we scale. We extend empathy far beyond genetic kin, too. Although mammals bond across species lines, your dog generally sees you as family, and primates sometimes adopt unrelated young. But humans can generalize empathy outward to tribes, nations, and sometimes abstract humanity itself. We can care about people we will never meet, in places we will never see, in futures we won't live to witness. We also force fairness through moral emotion. Apes show proto-fairness in experiments, and many social species punish freeloaders, but humans turn fairness into institutions. Law, religion, taxation, ideology. And most of our arguments aren't should we be fair, but what counts as fair. Equal shares, equal percentages, equal opportunity, equal outcome. We fight over the formula because fairness is already the assumed goal. We maintain long-term alliances between unrelated individuals and even unrelated groups. Many animals cooperate temporarily. Humans build durable institutions that outlive the people who founded them. We keep play in adulthood. In most species, it largely fades. In ours becomes art, sport, simulation, and experimentation. Rehearsal for futures that don't exist yet. We feel shame and guilt as internal policing mechanisms. Social animals fear punishment. Humans anticipate it. We punish ourselves preemptively to preserve reputation and cohesion, which lets cooperation scale without constant external enforcement. We pursue status and ambition. Not unique, but we often attach status to abstract achievement, knowledge, virtue, exploration, invention. You can become high status by discovering a thing rather than dominating someone. We exhibit religiosity and abstract spiritual thought. Whether it's adaptive glue or a cognitive byproduct, it often increases shared narrative and willingness to sacrifice for long-term communal goals. And we take risks, sometimes stupid ones. Risk tolerance is dangerous, but without it no one sails into open ocean. Experiments with steam engines. or builds rockets. None of these traits are individually unique. Fragments appear across Earth's intelligent species. Human uniqueness may not be a single, unprecedented trait. It may be an unusual cluster of uncommon ones, intensified, generalized, and capable of scaling. Evolution rarely produces perfect packages. It produces mosaics. It may be a statistically unlikely mosaic. High intelligence combined with scalable empathy, fairness enforcement, prolonged play, internalized moral policing, ambition channeled into abstraction, institutional alliance building, and a willingness to take existential risks. Any one of those alone might not build a civilization, but stacked together, especially alongside recursive language, cumulative culture, and fire, they create a feedback loop. Cooperation enables teaching, teaching enables cumulative culture amplifies innovation, and innovation increases surplus and complexity, which then rewards the very social emotions that made the whole thing possible in the first place. That's where compounding probability bites. If each of these traits only needs to be somewhat common, say a 75% pass rate, their combination can still be rare. High intelligence alone may be common, but intelligence fused with this specific emotional architecture, well, that might be rare. Life history and physical oddities. Our bodies also carry evolutionary strangeness, and so it may matter more than we usually think. Humans have an exceptionally long childhood. That alone may be a strong filter. We are born half-finished and stay dependent for years. That's expensive in evolutionary terms. It buys plasticity, the ability to absorb vast amounts of information and adapt to wildly different environments. We also see menopause and long post-reproductive life. Grandparents sticking around to stabilize knowledge transfer is a common transitional filter suggestion, and it's not trivial. A species that loses elders as soon as they stop reproducing may never accumulate long cultural memory. We also excel at endurance running. That may not matter for aliens, but persistence matters. The ability to keep going, physically and emotionally, may reinforce delayed gratification. It's hard to imagine a civilization builder that can't tolerate long, slow payoff curves. We are bipedal, but still have 4 limbs. That's an odd combination that leaves 2 limbs free for precision work. Opposable thumbs themselves are Earth-specific, but some general equivalent, high-precision manipulation, is probably required for tool refinement. We boast high manual dexterity, and that may matter more than raw intelligence. It's one thing to imagine a better tool, it's another to physically shape it. Our voice box supports a wide range of phonemes. Technology could bypass that, and aliens might communicate differently, but sound has one big advantage. It does not require line of sight. That matters for coordination. And then there's sweating instead of panting, a small detail that hints at something larger. Our brains are metabolically expensive, heat-producing organs. Our afforded architecture and cooling capacity are part of what makes sustained abstract thought possible. None of this guarantees civilization, but it's easy to imagine intelligent species lacking 1 or 2 of these and stalling short of tool-driven complexity. Social and cultural oddities. Civilization requires culture, or perhaps produces it inevitably, and here humans bring a very particular toolkit. We teach intentionally, not just imitation, not just play, but structured explanation and correction. That is rare in the animal kingdom, and accelerates knowledge transfer dramatically, especially of complex concepts. We build cumulative culture. Ideas stack, tools improve, knowledge compounds across generations. Writing magnifies that, but the deeper point is that we externalize memory. A species with perfect biological memory, but no external storage, might never invent writing, and without writing, complexity tends to hit ceilings sooner. We achieve scalable cooperation, from villages to cities to nations, often among unrelated strangers. That's not common. Many intelligent animals cooperate, but usually in small kin groups. We engage in symbolic storytelling that binds identity across time. Stories outlive individuals and allow coordination among people who will never meet. We maintain records, we build bureaucracies, we specialize labor when surplus exists. We tolerate strangers peacefully, at least often enough to build cities. That is not trivial. A species that treats every outsider as prey or rival may never scale. We trade, we calculate value, we trust abstract systems like currency and contracts. And we explore, not just locally, but across oceans and eventually into orbit. A planet with widely separated continents might host intelligent life that simply never bothers to cross the water. Capability does not guarantee motivation. But we should also consider the opposite, a waterhole filter, not the SETI one, not the literal waterhole either, but the evolutionary version. If a planet is too comfortable, if every need is met within a short walk of where you were born, why ever leave? We think of filters as things that can kill you, but a filter can also be a lack of pressure. A species might reach high intelligence and rich culture, then stall out because it never faced the ugly incentive of harsh winters, lean years, or empty frontiers. One could even argue that intelligent and educated aristocracies or upper classes have occasionally fallen into this case, where they had it relatively easy in a quasi-paradise, but they had a caste system of lower class below them who did have more hardships, but was not in a position to influence their behavior very much. A long-term caste system like that could eventually create a genetically divergent pair of species, too. And so you could end up with 10 million years of poetry by the proverbial waterhole, perfectly content and utterly stagnant. In that sense, Earth's instability may have been one of our greatest gifts. It didn't just make exploration possible, it made it necessary. By now you're probably agreeing with some of these, doubting others, and rolling your eyes at one or two. That's fine, some I do too. And there's some others I put out of the list because they simply seem silly longshots or poorly reasoned. I tried to limit that to the worst of the worst, and I do not consider myself unbiased, so I tried to leave most on there. And the point isn't that every item is decisive, the point is that several of them, stacked together, might be. Tool and technology oddities. Our technological arc is the one most commonly considered our defining trait, what we have that animals don't, or rather what some unique humanness in us let us have, and it depends on a handful of especially interesting leaps. The obvious one is fire. We've practiced fire mastery for at least 1 million years, and for most of that time, we did almost nothing transformative with it. Pottery didn't show up until the final sliver of that era, metallurgy even later, so fire alone isn't sufficient for rapid progress. And yet, no other terrestrial species seems to have adopted it at all, even with many of them living in close proximity of it for millennia in order to actually see its controlled and beneficial uses. And in spite of that, no other terrestrial species seems to have adopted it at all. That combination makes it suspicious. Fire, while dangerous, is universally useful. Concentrated energy, cooking, lighting, hardening tools, reshaping landscapes, scaring away predators, but its adoption appears astonishingly rare. That gives it real credibility as a potential major filter. Tool use probably predates fire, and we're not alone there either. We make tools that build better tools. Recursive refinement may be the key distinction. A stone sharpens a blade sharpens a handle, the handle improves leverage, and suddenly you're in a feedback loop. Iron sharpens iron, and speaking of metallurgy and material sciences may come later, but they amplify everything else. Once you can reshape matter intentionally, the pace changes. Agriculture is another massive shift. Following herds is one thing. Tending land and livestock is something else entirely. It requires patience, delayed gratification, surplus management, and planning beyond a single season. It isn't completely unique to humans, but elsewhere it's rudimentary at best. Then we begin harnessing energy sources: wind, water, steam, electricity. These are force multipliers, much like beasts of burden, except now the animal is physics itself. We also conceptualize invisible forces, magnetism, gravity, electromagnetism, and treat them as predictable systems rather than mysteries. That step, moving from myth to model, may not be inevitable. It did, after all, long elude many brilliant minds. Most importantly, we build technological complexity generation over generation. The romantic notion that humanity regularly collapses into total technological amnesia is often overstated. Once cumulative culture truly ignited, we mostly kept moving forward. Slowly at times, unevenly, but forward. And so far we've avoided long-term stagnation. That may be fragile, it may not last, but the trend since civilization emerged has been upward, not flat. Compare that to the million-year stretch between mastering fire and doing much with it. Once the snowball started rolling, it did not stop. We often talk about these traits as gifts, but many are double-edged. Our obsession with status drives innovation, yes, but also drives war. Our ability to scale cooperation in nations gave us the Apollo program, but also gave us the capability for global annihilation. It is possible the human oddity isn't that we have these traits, that we haven't used them to delete ourselves. Not yet, at least. Psychological oddities tied to civilization. On top of cognition sits psychology, the emotional layer that actually drives behavior. We engage in hypersocial gossip cognition. That sounds trivial, but gossip is how norms spread and reputations stabilize. It's how trust scales beyond direct observation. In a small tribe, you can see who cheats. In a city, you rely on what people say about each other. We also obsess over patterns. That obsession fuels science and superstition. Early astronomy, mathematics, and natural philosophy were often tangled up with mysticism and numerology. We remember scientists clashing with religious authorities and assume it was always science versus faith, but historically it was often stranger than that. Some of the same people pushing mathematical boundaries were also trying to tie rituals or decode divine messages. Pattern hunger cuts both ways. Which leads us to another oddity. We tolerate cognitive dissonance. Conflicting ideas can coexist long enough for innovation to ferment. Individually and collectively, we carry contradictions around without immediately resolving them. You'll sometimes hear, from myself included, that a certain amount of crazy may be necessary for civilization building. An ultra-rational society that purges inconsistency instantly might collapse into its own rigidity. That could even be a late filter for sufficiently advanced civilizations. We undertake long-term projects that outlive their builders, cathedrals, irrigation systems, colonization programs. That requires faith in futures we won't personally see. We imagine unseen worlds before we reach them, first in myth, then in astronomy. We cooperate with non-relatives at scale, and we even extend quasi-kinship to animals, not just as pets, but as working partners or livestock. Shepherds historically cared deeply for the animals they would eventually slaughter. That's an ethically uncomfortable position, but it reflects a remarkable social flexibility. And we develop abstract ethics, the idea that certain acts are wrong not merely because they are punished, but because they violate shared principles. Whether that ultimately helps us to avoid existential catastrophe remains an open question. Dark Horse Candidates. A few final oddities are less discussed but intriguing. Humans have unusually flexible pair bonding and reproductive strategies. Most mammals stick to fairly rigid patterns. We sustain a wide range of social arrangements across cultures and history. Long-term monogamy, serial partnerships, extended kin networks, cooperative parenting structures. That flexibility may stabilize societies under changing conditions. We also benefit from the grandmother effect, where post-reproductive elders reinforce knowledge continuity. We cook our food, boosting caloric intake and freeing metabolic resources for brain expansion, though notably, we did that for a very long time before technological acceleration truly ignited. We love music and rhythm, which may reinforce cohesion, memory, and synchronized behavior. We domesticate other species and intentionally reshape ecosystems. We created writing and numeracy, the scaffolding on which later complexity rests. We manage coalitions and diplomacy with sophisticated political cognition. And perhaps most telling, we are obsessed with tools and novelty. There's always one more improvement to make. One speculative wrinkle worth mentioning. If a civilization has the same average intelligence as ours, but a much steeper distribution, very few high-end cognitive outliers, innovation may be fragile. It's not that all progress comes from the brightest individuals, but a disproportionate share clusters there. A society without enough cognitive outliers might struggle to generate or preserve cumulative breakthroughs. By that logic, telling a primitive culture they're not ready for technology can be backwards. If Edison had waited for the average person to be a genius before selling light bulbs, he'd still be in the dark. Alright, those are the raw ingredients, a sprawling catalog of traits. Any one of them might be common in the galaxy or rare, and it may only take a handful to be uncommon for humanity's path to technological civilization to become statistically unlikely. Today we're looking at what might make humanity unusual, what pathways of evolution led to us, and what very different paths intelligence might take on other worlds. One creator whose work fits that theme especially well is Quinn's Ideas, who dives into classic science fiction like Dune and explores the deeper questions the stories raise about evolution, society, and the future, often imagining how different paths might lead to very different kinds of stories and civilizations. If you enjoy thinking about the long roads, that's something I touch on in Settling Saturn's Rings, this month's exclusive. We look at how civilizations might spread, adapt, and endure in environments far removed from Earth, including new megastructure concepts that might have roads millions of miles long. That's just some of the awesome content available on Nebula, where every episode of SFA appears early and completely ad-free, including our monthly exclusives like Settling Saturn's Rings. Go watch that or Quinn's Dune 3 analysis and use my link or the QR code to get 50% off an annual plan. That's just $30 for the whole year. Which oddities make the best filters? Now that we've toured this catalog of human oddities, the natural question is which of them actually matter. Most are interesting footnotes, less so filters that winnow out very few, but a handful look like plausible major filters, and maybe even great filters, not because they are impossible, but because they are bottlenecks, narrow gates, not brick walls. A species doesn't have to be forbidden from developing fire or language or large-scale cooperation. It only has to develop them rarely or too late, or in a form that doesn't scale or retain. And that's how a galaxy with trillions of planets can still feel quiet. Let's bundle the best candidates into a few gates, not because evolution has an actual checklist, but because it helps us see where the path pinches. The energy and manipulation gate. Technology needs two things up front: concentrated energy and the ability to shape the world with precision. Fire is the obvious candidate, not because fire is good, but because it's a ratchet. Once you have a controllable, portable chemical reaction, you get cooking, warmth, hardening, land management, and eventually kiln, smelting, glass, and chemistry. It's a bridge from using nature to reprogramming nature. And again, the suspicious part is not that we mastered fire, it's that on Earth, nobody else did. Plenty of species have had millions of years of exposure to wildfires, and now to our fires. Many are clever, some use tools, yet we don't see any other lineage building a fire tradition, a fire culture, or a fire economy. You don't see cats and dogs trying to start fires to stay warm, even though they will often sleep right by one. That suggests a combination might be needed: the right environment, the right risk tolerance, the right social continuity, and the right kind of manipulation. Because fire is not just an invention, it's a maintenance skill. You need to keep it alive, transport it, feed it, defend it, and teach us to use it safely. A species that can't safely handle concentrated energy, whether because it lives underwater, lacks fine manipulation, or can't transmit technique reliably, might hit an invisible ceiling. The smartest people in a beautiful undersea civilization may never forge a rocket engine, not because they are less intelligent, but because their world never gives them the first rung of the ladder. Partnered with fire is recursive toolmaking, tools that build better tools. It's one thing to pick up a rock, it's another to use that rock to shape a better rock, and to use that to shape a better handle, and then use that to build a device that lets you make the next generation with less effort and more precision. That feedback loop is how you go from clever to compounding. If a species has intelligence but can't reliably manipulate its environment with high precision, no equivalent of hands, tentacles, or micro-manipulators, or whatever alien substitute exists, then their technology may remain perpetually artisanal and stalled. Not because ideas don't occur to them, but because they can't physically cash those ideas out. The information gate. Even if you can shape matter and control energy, you still need something else: the ability to accumulate knowledge so the species gets smarter over time, not just individuals. Lots of animals learn, many even have traditions. A few teach in limited ways, but that leap that matters is social learning to cumulative culture, where innovations stack across generations instead of being rediscovered and forgotten. That requires two bottlenecks working together: intentional teaching and communication that compresses complexity. Recursive language isn't important because it sounds impressive, it's important because it turns experience into transferable code, one brain to another, without needing the student to live through every failure personally. Without that compression, every generation pays the full price. You have a world full of geniuses, but they can't reliably externalize and transmit what they know. Civilization never snowballs. The best inventor dies and the invention dies with them. Knowledge becomes local and fragile, trapped in individuals and small groups. Let us pause for a moment to consider this. How many Leonardo da Vinci's or Albert Einsteins were born 40,000 years ago, only to live and die in a tribe of 20 people? They might have had the same raw brain power as our greatest legends, but without the information gate, without the cumulative stack of knowledge to stand on, their genius was spent perfecting a slightly better flint knapping technique. It's a haunting thought. A galaxy could be full of brilliant minds that simply lack the operating system of civilization. In that sense, culture is a species-level memory, and language is the interface. Writing is the most obvious external hard drive, but it's downstream of the deeper talent, building a communication system that carries abstractions accurately enough for ideas to compound over centuries. If that leap is rare, the galaxy could be full of brilliant creatures who never invented the alphabet, not because they weren't smart enough, but because their knowledge never becomes a durable, accumulating thing. The Scalability and Motivation Gate. So you've got energy, manipulation, and cumulative culture. You still need the ability to scale, because spaceflight is not a lone genius in a cave, it's a civilization project. You can't build rockets, telescopes, or space stations without millions of strangers cooperating. Miners, farmers, engineers, administrators, teachers, machinists, caregivers, and the entire web of logistics that keeps them alive. Most intelligent life on Earth runs on kinship rules. Help your relatives, distrust outsiders, compete with rival groups. Humans didn't abolish that, we layered something on top of it. We learned to tolerate strangers and trust abstractions. Laws, contracts, money, institutions, identities larger than family. That's a gate. A species can be clever and social and still never cross it. If every community remains small and suspicious, you don't get cities. And without cities, you don't get specialization at scale. And without specialization, you don't get a space program. But even with scalability, you need motivation. Capability doesn't guarantee direction. This is where the waterhole filter fits cleanly. We usually imagine filters as disasters, meteors, supervolcanoes, pandemics, self-inflicted annihilation. But as we said, a filter can also be comfort, a lack of pressure, a world that is too generous and can make stagnation stable. If every need is met within a short walk of where you were born, and the climate never punishes complacency, and food is always abundant, there is no innovate or die incentive. A species might be intelligent, artistic, and even philosophical and never simply leave. On Earth, our instability was brutal, but was also catalytic. Alien alternatives and why this still matters. Of course, none of these gates have to be passed in the exact human way. Evolution is wildly creative. An alien species might substitute geothermal energy for fire, chemistry for metallurgy, or distributed cognition for syntactic language. They might enforce cooperation hormonally, or as an emergent property of a hive mind, or via social structures we can't even picture. But that doesn't remove the bottlenecks, it just changes the form they take. Some pathway still has to deliver concentrated usable energy, precise manipulation, durable accumulating knowledge, large-scale cooperation, and a reason to push beyond the local optimum. Whether those come from fire and hands and writing, or from vents and tentacles and bioluminescent memory webs, the gates are still there. And that's the core point. The galaxy does not need a single, catastrophic great filter to look empty. It may only need a few narrow gates, each one individually not that rare, but collectively rare when stacked in sequence. If even one of those gates is uncommon, if cumulative culture almost never ignites, if scalable cooperation is fragile, if motivation to explore is usually absent, if concentrated controllable energy rarely becomes a tool, then silence begins to make sense. If that's true, then our rarity isn't a boast, it's a responsibility. If minds like ours are scarce, then the future of thought, curiosity, and creativity in this region of the cosmos may rest squarely on our shoulders. The universe might be quiet not because it's empty, but because civilizations are fragile, fleeting, and statistically rare, and perhaps that rarity is whispering to us, take care, tread wisely, and try to make your fleeting spark last long enough to light more fires among the stars.